Let's get started and welcome. This year we had decided to have something special because we have the 25th anniversary of the SED since the first meeting in Minneapolis. And we had been planning this for a while, and one of the people who was supposed to be here is Dale Mortensen, and unfortunately he left. So this changes the character, but we're going to be talking of both things. So this is SED at 25, a tribute to Dale. I met Dale 35 years ago. Lessons in dynamic programming, equilibrium labor theory, research with perseverance, scholarship without pretense. Tom Sargent was the one who did the move to start the new meetings in Minneapolis when we lost control. And he has not been able to come, but he sends these words. So this is Tom. Dignity, reliability, vision, exquisite craftsmanship, a steady commitment to doing economics carefully, an example to be admired and copied. Dale. So, Ed Prescott has been one of the founders too, so of SED, and friend of Dale for a long time. Ed.
First, I want to start off by saying Dale is special. I never heard him criticize the economic research of another economist. He pursued his research agenda and exhibited the finest scholarship in this pursuit, successful pursuit. I first met Dale many years ago at Scott Paper in 1962. We were both summer interns in the Operation Research Department there. He was between his first and second year at was then the Graduate School of Industrial Administration at Carnegie Tech. Now it's the Tepper School at Carnegie Mellon University. I went to the Case Institute of Technology, and after getting a master's degree, joined Dale at GSIA. We had the same advisor, Michael Lovell. Further, I followed Dale across the stage at graduation in 1967. That's when we received our PhD degrees. I was the second president of SED. Alan said I was wrong. Technically, I was the first. But in fact, though, Tom Sargent was the first. He's the one who set up the vision and the plan and started the annual meetings, I believe about 1990, at the University of Minnesota. I think was the first meetings. This is when we got rid of the control and it became a real economics only. Well, all organizations have problems, and you'll hear more about this. I just heard this, but when Dale, I suggested Dale's a successor president to me, and the advisory board enthusiastically supported it. But he faces a thorny issue when he came in as a new president. There were some who opposed the launching of the Review of Economic Dynamics, which was led by Tom Sargent. the two Toms, the meetings and the journal, are the key for the society. And keeping young. I think I set up some organizational principles that codified what Tom Sargent had laid out. Young people, key. Innovate. But it was fortunate for the society that Dale was able to overcome the opposition to the red. And he did it in a sweet way that left everybody happy, which was quite an accomplishment. The society has such a great debt to Dale, as does the economic science. I leave it to others to talk about his scientific contributions, but he played a major, major role in this society, highly successful society. Thank you.
Tom Cooley is also one of the founders, and particularly founder of RED.
Well, thanks very much for organizing this. This is meant to be a look back at the past 25 years of the SED, and also, most importantly, to honor Dale, our third president. Now, I think Ed alluded to the story. Most people here know about how the SED was created from the ashes of the Society for Economic Dynamics and Control. We lost control, and that was good. But it itself was created in the 1970s as an inspired marriage between engineers and optimal control theorists and economists. And the engineers thought they knew how to shoot the economy around the moon, and the economists were interested in their techniques and their tools. The details of how the marriage ended are like most divorces, kind of nasty. People misbehaved. You don't want to know the story. But the SEDC had become moribund, and Tom and Ed set in motion the rejuvenation of the society, minus control, as a collection of people who were interested in talking about dynamic economics. And the initial meetings were small, but enthusiastic and in some great locations. That there was also a strong feeling that we needed more outlets for the kind of good research that was being generated by the society. And Elsevier was the publisher of the Journal of Economic Dynamics and Control. It still exists. Many of you still publish there. I have myself at one time. But at the time, they maintained an iron-fisted control over that journal, and they just did not want to talk about the society having any kind of say in the editorial policies. And so this idea began to circulate. Now, Dale was a man of uncommon character and principles. And when he took over as president of the society, he was interested in pursuing this idea of having our own journal. But, you know, anyone who knows Dale knows that he was also very calm. He was very taciturn individual. He had no interest whatsoever in any kind of petty bullshit about who said this, who said what, they were doing this. And for some reason, I don't now recall, he enlisted me to deal with the journal issue. And I managed to negotiate, after lots of discussion with Dale and lots of visits to academic presses and so on, I managed to negotiate a deal with the academic press to publish a new journal, the Review of Economic Dynamics, and free ourselves of the bonds of the evil Elsevier. And that was fine until a few years later when Elsevier bought the academic press. So much for all our hard work. So we're now publishing volume 17 of the journal. It has an impact factor very close to that of the Journal of Monetary Economics. In some periods, it's higher. I was the first coordinating editor. The title coordinating editor came out of our kind of proletarian leanings as a new feisty startup society. There wasn't going to be one person doing it. We're all doing it. And we're now on our fifth, Matthias Debke. And I think it's a great achievement, and that achievement owes so much to Dale's calm, quiet leadership of this whole transition process. I looked back last week at Volume 1 of the journal, and I was impressed all over again by the people we got to contribute to it. A lot of that was due to Dale's influence and his willingness to commit himself to making the journal a truly quality publication. We hit the ground running in the first issue with papers by Jim Heckman, Rob Townsend, Mike Woodford, Ken Burdett, Steve Williamson, Philippe Agian. And of course, the fourth issue of the first volume had a lead article, a very important lead article, by Dale and Crispus Arides. Dale was committed to the society and the journal, but it wasn't in the abstract. Like most things he did in life, he did them only because he was committed to the ideas, committed to the furtherance of knowledge. The future of the journal is going to be different from the past. I don't know what it's going to be like because the world of publishing is changing, and we're in a place where, at a point in time, where we need to think about what the future of that journal is going to be. And I just wish we had Dale here in the House to help us think that through. We just miss him terribly. Thank you.
The meetings are meetings of sessions, contributed, invited, and panel lectures, special invited lectures. In the first meetings, one of them was Nancy Stockey. And please, Nancy.
Okay, so this year the SED is celebrating, its 25th anniversary, and at the same time we're commemorating Dale Mortensen, who was one of the early contributors to the society, as Tom Cooley just pointed out. But to begin, I'd like to congratulate and to thank Ed Prescott and Tom Sargent for having had the courage to, back in 1989, just get this meeting and this society started. I look out in this crowd and I realize that most of you weren't economists in 1989. You were in like junior high school or someplace else in the educational pipeline. So maybe this is the time to indulge in a little bit of history of thought and just talk a little bit about what life was like in 1989. So I said it was a courageous thing at that time to just, out of nowhere, organize a meeting where you invite people to come, like nobody had any expenses paid then as now, and just to come and present your work to an audience. You didn't know sort of who the audience was going to be when you arrived here. So it was I just think it was a very bold move to get this all started. And it was especially so. It was especially important in 1989, and I would say for two reasons. First of all, remember in 1989, the web. I don't think it existed, but anyway, it didn't really have anything. Almost nobody used email. There was no Skype, and so communication across colleagues was, either face to face or on paper. And the face to face stuff then was. I would say, it's important now and probably even more important then. So it was a chance to hear other people and to present your own work. The other reason it was very important is that it was in in 1989, I would say, the division, this society started as, the word dynamics is in the title. And so it started with, just, I would say, a pretty strong emphasis on macroeconomics. And at that time, the distinction between freshwater and saltwater was probably at about its maximum. And for people of the more freshwater persuasion, a lot of the major journals and conferences were kind of controlled by the saltwater crowd, and it wasn't so easy, especially for young researchers, to get their papers accepted in those journals or get their papers put on the programs for those conferences. So the SED really provided, a forum and later the journal, an outlet for, an alternative line of thought. And, a lot of the people, a lot of the ideas that the SED was sort of, created to promote, they were kind of fringe ideas in 1989, and they become mainstream in the years since then. Okay, so, the SEDs always had also, an emphasis on kind of, I would say, a combination of rigorous modeling and bringing, theoretical evidence to bear on important questions. And that's continued until now. And I would say, and also an emphasis on young scholars, sort of bringing, the young generation with the fresh ideas, to the forefront. And that brings me to Dale. So, throughout his career, Dale, he attacked first-rate problems. A lot of them, just kind of a very similar stream of problems, questions over his whole career, but with an always changing set of, tools and techniques. And Dale was, among the people I've known, one of those who just was at the best at kind of staying, always eager to stay at the forefront of the novel techniques and novel ideas in his field. And he was also one of the people who was most generous, to his junior colleagues. And I was fortunate to have him as a colleague at Northwestern during my first job. And I remember him as being just, tremendously supportive, tremendously interested, not just me, but in, what all the young kids were working on, what we were doing, what we were finding. And in that sense, I would say Dale remained a young researcher throughout his career. He never decided the learning phase of his career was over. So I think his spirit will live on in this society, for many years to come.
So we presidents are president for 3 years, and that's it. But society lives and works because other people also do a lot of work, and I work with vision too. Ellen McGrattan has been the treasury for many years, and Christian Zimmerman also the secretary. And that makes our work very easily because you only have to ask them what's going on, and that's it. But it's not just simply the work in the kitchen. It's also a vision about what the meetings have to be, what the newsletter should be, and so on. So, Ellen?
So Ramon wanted me to talk about the SED from the kitchen. Now, for those of you who know Ramon, you never know if is that a Spanish idiom or is that a Ramonism? Like talking about the SED from the kitchen. Because I'm the treasurer, so we have an idiom in English, cooking the books. Does he want me to talk about how I cooked the books all the years or something else? But I'll try to do the Spanish idiom. I think what he meant was talk about the SED kind of from the beginning, because it's been a struggle to find anybody who any economist who balances their checkbook who will take over my job, and we're in search. We're giving up in a year, so one of you guys has to take over for me. But yeah, so I've been coming to the SED for many, many years. I'm not going to confess how many. But when these guys describe, back in the beginning when they wrestled it out of the hands of the control theorists, I mean, they staged a coup. These, Tom and Ed and Tom and Dale, they wanted the old timers out. They wanted the young people in. They wanted a forum for new research. And Nancy's right. There wasn't, this was a very small group of people who every year came to present their works. It was kind of like going to the annual barbecue of your family. Well, okay, not my family because they're a little weird, but like, the annual barbecue. And it was a small group. I mean, I'm going to say we probably had 100, 150 people. People submitted papers. Everyone was accepted. I mean, it was, why turn anybody down? And I hear some people talk about, how the SED is such a club. I mean, really? I mean, anybody could come. And it was a very open group. And as treasurer, what was great for me is that I got to, see these amazing people, work with amazing people who became the presidents. Tom, who was my advisor, and then Ed. Ed was actually the person who recruited me to be treasurer because he saw my OCD tendencies. And we realized the administrative assistant helping us, didn't write anything down, like at all, like no transactions. So Ed and I had to step in. But to give you an idea of how small it was, I remember one day on a Saturday, we were, there was, people had sent in the monies that we needed to run the conference. He and I were writing out, remember in the old, no, you guys don't, remember in the old days, those MasterCard slips you had to fill out? So there's Ed and I, Saturday afternoon, writing out all the MasterCard slips, sticking them into envelopes and mailing them to the people. Then we realized, okay, checks are better because then you could just go to the bank and deposit them and then the people see the checks. But it was a pretty low level but fun group. And what was really cool was, like I said, it was like a family, and my husband would come, my kids would come to the meetings. People like Bev Mortensen would come. In fact, my husband, who's an aerospace engineer, would say, I'm looking forward to the SED, because they go to meetings in like Huntsville, Alabama, and Dayton, Ohio, and we'd go to really great places. And he said, I always want to go, I look forward to the wives tour. They would tour around whatever city. So he would go on the wives tour in these different cities. But, after a while, it got, word got out that this was a really great thing and that this was a forum for young people. And it grew, especially with Tim Keogh and Antonio Merlo running it in Algero. I mean, I don't know what they did. They got on television and advertised or something. But, we jumped up in size a lot. But I think it's kept the original vision that, it encourages young people. It's open to everybody. In fact, and it's great to get on the program. A story about Ed. He came running down the hall one day. I'm like, oh, good news, Ed? I'm thinking like maybe we got a paper into a journal. Good news. I got onto the SED program. And he was serious, okay? Like that's serious. He still cheers if he gets on the SED program, okay? But one thing I think it's retained, or I feel like it's retained, it's a bigger family, but it's a family.
Ellen mentioned the meeting in Algero, which is when actually we grew up quite a lot in size. And one of the invited lectures, if I remember well, it was about Bobo Lucas. He's been always a friend of the society and, of course, of Dale Mortensen, too. But
Well, Ramon's right. I was not one of the founding fathers of this great organization, but I was a beneficiary of it. And I think the quality of the presidents got this place going, starting with Tom and Ed and Dale, and pretty good run in subsequent years as well. Is kind of helped to give the SED a kind of style or focus on explicit theoretical models, models that connect up with something we're trying to explain or some normative problem we're trying to solve. Lots of math, lots of data. This has been kind of the ethos of the society, and I think in part because these founders were such inspirations in a way. So I'm just going to talk about Dale. I've known Dale and Beverly since we were together at Carnegie Tech. I guess a lot of this stuff started at Carnegie Tech. Think of Ed's talk. This was in the middle 1960s when most of you guys probably, some of you weren't even born. I was not on Dale's thesis committee, but we jointly participated in a conference that Edmund Phelps wrote in this book called Microeconomic Foundations of Employment and Inflation Theory, which I don't know if that's on anybody's reading list anymore, but it was a big turning point. Phelps was a older, much more famous guy, and for Dale and me, who were just starting out, and other people in the volume, it was a real pleasure. We'd never been into such a big time conference and had our work taken so seriously. Dale's contribution in that conference was a theory of wage and employment dynamics. Looking at the paper, it's worked out in a rigorous style with all the theorems and proofs. It was a solid piece of theoretical economics. And what was especially striking was that the behavior of this model, we didn't have models of employment and unemployment and matching of firms and workers. And this is what Dale was talking about. So the math matched up with things that we all knew was out there. What's it like? What are your choices if you lose your job? If you're a firm, how do you go about how do you decide whether to expand or contract your labor force? What are the costs and benefits of doing it? And this stuff was completely new in 1969, and nobody was analyzing labor markets the way Dale did in his paper. See, it was a bombshell. Now, people are talking about Dale's generosity. A model, this kind of it draws ambitious people like flies. So there were a lot of loose ends and way extensions of Dale's original work. Chris Pisarides was inspired by it and contributed to it. It became not just a one-man show, but a joint development of more and more sophisticated models of unemployment. Now, Rob Scheimer is going to describe this in a moment, and he'll do it much better. The realism in these models were for Dale, the point of getting the model was to have predictions about data, and there wasn't, and that's what drew Dale to the Danish data, where you got this beautiful data on people's careers and the firms that they work for. Lets you ask questions of the data that you couldn't ask before, and there have been more developments on that line too. So Dale was this empirical, the fact that you're writing out hard theories and make strong predictions to data and testing them. That was the combination that excited him, and he developed it. He was still developing it. last time I saw him give a talk was in last fall in Stanford, and he was working on harder problems, harder math. This was his idea of retirement, you know. And as he said, he's always kept himself on the frontier. So in 1969, he was standing alone, but by then he was a leader of the group of some of the best economists in the world. It was a great career and a great person.
A great friend and co-author who can also tell us more about his contributions, Ken Burdett. Ken.
I'm going to speak as Dale's first student, I guess, PhD student. And what I want to talk about is every now and again, the economics profession, or a subset of the economics profession, seems to lose its mind. And particularly the people here, you probably don't remember it, but for 35 years we talked about SLM and macroeconomics. And everything I did from an undergraduate to a graduate was all about this, the elasticity of LM curve. It was wonderful, because you did the first subject, you did the exam in the first year, was the same as the second year, which was the same as the third year. And it was one subject just wiped out. It was the same with labor economics. Yeah, having a whole area and then not talking about unemployment. I mean, why? The only reason for unemployment was too high a minimum wage. How did you counteract that? You use some employment subsidy or something like that. The areas were just not substantial. Yeah? And in these people, and several people here, were feeling that the subject wasn't dealing with the topics it should be dealing with. There was a wonderful feeling amongst, I was just a young whippersnapper graduate student. Many of the people here were young professors. And they had this dissatisfaction with both macro, labor, and several other areas. And Dale wasn't certainly the only one. Several here, I'm looking at them, so had the same dissatisfaction. The genius of Dale, and it was just a privilege to me to watch it going through, that he not only felt dissatisfied, but he actually did something about it. He constructed a model, a consistent equilibrium framework of which you could address the questions everybody wanted to answer. Why was there unemployment? You know, why were there transitions? Why is unemployment persistent? Why are wages sticky? Yeah? The genius was, and I was very lucky at the time because I was doing my PhD under Dale, and if you did a PhD under Dale, you have about 10 minutes. He sort of says, well, what are you working on? And then after 10 minutes, he said, you know, that interest is interesting to me because it's just the problem I'm working over. And then you spent the next 2 hours listening to what Dale was doing at the time. And so, I guess from 71 to 75, I watched this very clever human being trying to construct an alternative framework. Other people here constructed the same, different frameworks, but the same thing. And it was flying alone. You couldn't say the great man Keynes had done this. You had to construct the framework by yourself, and that's what Dale did. And that's why I guess we honor him today. It's stood up very well. Will people develop it? Let's hope so. Will it get better? Let's hope so. Dale would be upset if you don't make it better. That's all I've got to say.
But this is not just a club. People had a lot of to learn from Dale from all over. And Rob Scheimer can tell us more about it.
I think I'm the token MIT PhD up here. I grew up not knowing what the SED was. They didn't tell us about things like that. And my first meeting, I think, was in 2000, and Dale was at that meeting. And so I wanted to think, actually, it's been remarkable for me talking to a lot of different people from different cohorts about Dale and getting a remarkably consistent view about what his research was, but also what he was like as a person. Because I think that there's many people you meet, and older generation says how generous they are with their time, and younger people say you never find the guy. Or it's not my impression at all of Dale. So I just had 5 thoughts that I wanted to make about sort of coming out of what it was like growing up as a labor economist under the shadow of Dale. The thing which really stands out for me about him, number one, that I think is different than almost anybody else, certainly different than me, I hope, is that what he did was one thing, and he did it remarkably well. His first paper that Bob alluded to in the Phelps volume was called A Theory of Wage and Employment Dynamics. And I think maybe you could have given that title to almost every paper that Dale wrote. And he's continually perfecting that idea. Yesterday, there was a really nice session where 3 of his co-authors, current co-authors, presented papers. Jesper Begger, Melvin Coles, and Rasmus Lentz presented 3 very different papers on a theory of wage and employment dynamics that are in progress with Dale. But this wasn't, point number 2, this wasn't one model that he just kept on writing down the same model and saying, I got it right when I was 30 years old, and you guys are just going to listen to it until you believe it. As I feel like I'm also repeating a lot of the things that have been said before, as Bob said. It just continues to keep on learning and improving his models. And for me, one of the big professional thrills that I've had is at various times when I interact with Dale, I discussed a paper of his, or I just gave him some comments. Actually, at the conference for Phelps, I discussed a paper of his at a Festrev conference for Ned Phelps, and so I brought back a lot of that old team from the original Phelps volume. And I discussed a paper of Dale's, and watching Dale, I was like 3 years out of graduate school or something, watching Dale actually listen to me, and the final version of his paper reflected what my comments were. And I think it had some impact on the research that he was doing. And that was a tremendously thrilling thing for me. And it's not a reaction, I think, that you necessarily always get when you go to talk to somebody about your views about something they've been working on for 40 years. Dale was really special in that way. The third thing I want to say that was really important for me is I think a lot of us think about Dale's contributions as being primarily theoretical, and he has a number of really important theoretical contributions, going back to early work about what unemployment duration looks like in the presence of expiring unemployment benefits and what impact unemployment benefits have. Very well-known work with Pissarides, the Mortensen-Pissarides or Diamond-Mortensen-Pissarides model, which is what he received the Nobel Prize for, and a number of other papers. But I think as important as that, and it certainly showed up in a number of the papers that were presented yesterday, was that Dale was interested in these theories not because they were mathematically beautiful theories, which they were, but because they were theories that spoke to the issues that he thought were important, and they were theories that made contact with data. When he started working on the theories, they didn't make contact with data because the data wasn't there. And so the third big thing I think that Dale did was really being instrumental with other people, Henning Bunzel is somewhere here, in putting together the match worker firm data in Denmark that's been incredibly useful for many, many researchers, Dale and many others, and also led to similar types of data sets in a number of other countries. I wish we had it in the U.S., but a number of other European countries and countries elsewhere in the world. So this tight connection between theory and empirical work is something that was instrumental in Dale's work. And I think it's also something which has been very special in the labor search literature, a number of different lines of it. The theory and data have really co-evolved together. The fourth thing, and again, I feel like I'm saying things that have been said before, is that Dale has, as I've seen, always been incredibly supportive to the younger generation. I mentioned already that one of the first times I interacted with him, actually the first time I saw Dale, I think he and Chris were presenting a chapter for the Handbook of Labor Economics, and Dale, this is Dale Mortensen, is incredibly intimidating, so I had some comments, but then I couldn't get up the courage to actually talk to Dale. So I didn't say anything. And then about 3 months later, I think they presented a chapter for the Handbook of Macroeconomics. And there, somehow I managed to screw up the courage. And it was really just an incredibly positive experience for me. Again, listen to what I had to say. And then on the other side, going back to the SED in 2000 when he was here, or some of the early Rogerson and Wright MBR Summer Institute workshops, presenting my own work and getting Dale's very strong, listening attentively and very strong feedback, which is something that, again, was special to get from anybody, and even more special from somebody with the mind like Dale. So I felt his support and really making me part of the team and welcoming me with Bev into his home as well. And then the last thing I want to say, when you interact with someone like Dale, so you can make it, I'm sorry. Yeah, I know I wouldn't be able to get through this part. Dale made it seem easy. And, we know it's not. He was incredibly hardworking. He loved what he did. He put a tremendous amount of work into his own research, but he also into students. I just want to close on, if I can. So the week that Dale was awarded the Nobel Prize, I was lucky enough to be in Aarhus with Dale. On the Monday, he got the phone call that he had been awarded the Nobel Prize. And I think for many people, that would kind of be it for the week. It's a pretty good achievement. But, Dale was supposed to teach a course that week. So Thursday, he was supposed to teach 3 hours. Friday, he was supposed to teach 6 hours. And so he did his teaching, 3 hours on Thursday, 3 hours Friday morning. And then a student of his was presenting a lunch. So he went to a student's lunch seminar. And then 3 hours in the afternoon. And then another student came to Dale and said, I've got some work that I want to show you. And an hour later, at the whiteboard, they were still going. Everyone else was off at the pub. It was remarkable.
Thanks, Rob. And so have been said by many, his generosity, and one of the things he showed is producing great students, which are no longer students, are now faculties in many places. So Guido Mencia.
So Dale advised an enormous number of students during his long career. The rumor has it more than 100. It goes from Ken Burdett and John Cannon in the early 70s, mid-60s, to Rasmus Lentz and myself in the 2000s. It's really so many people. And I think I can speak for all of them when I say that Dale was really a great mentor. Dale had a few unique traits that made him such an excellent advisor. First of all, Dale was very generous with his time. Now, he would meet with each of his students at least once a week. For me, he was Fridays at 2 p.m. And as a grad student, I understood that was generous of Dale. Now, as a professor now, I understand really how exceptionally generous that was. to put aside 1,000 of tasks he had to do and the tens of projects, the co-authors he has to berate, and listen to our wimpy attempts at research. That was really fantastic. The second trait, exceptional trait that make of Dale as an advisor was his ability to transmit calm and steadiness to his students. Now, grad students, especially Italian ones, just watch me now, tend to react dramatically to even the smallest setbacks. So I remember in 2003, it's probably April, I go into Dale's office saying, "Oh no, my idea from Lemma 3 doesn't work, and my career is over. I'll probably have to go back to Italy and live with my mom until I'm 45. The week before I had to send out the packages for the job market, I go into Dale's office and say, no, I can't go on the job market. It's clear that I need at least 5 or 6 more years to finish my thesis. Now, Dale would listen to all of these panic attacks and chuckle. He had this very warm and open chuckle, and then point out that in the long run, it was not the daily hurdles that mattered, but fundamentals. And it's always good when somebody reminds you that fundamentals matter. Intellectual curiosity, passion, and clear economic reasoning. And he was a great living example of that. He would just not sweat the small stuff. The third trait that made Dale so wonderful as an advisor is naturally his love of economics. Dale would start talking about his research, as Ken points out, as soon as he could. And he would get excited about even the most technical and nerdy stuff. I remember he would be so excited because I was using Schauder's fixed point theorem, and he thought he could use it too to prove existence in one of his papers. He would really get happy about it. And you would talk to him about your own research, and if you had any good, clever insight, no matter how small or how far remote from what he was doing, his eyes would lit up. He would really get excited, and that I think it rubbed off on all of his students and makes going through the tough stretches that much easier. So, meetings with Dale every Friday were really the central point of my growth as an economist. So much so that on the day before leaving Northwestern for UPenn, the one thing I decided to do was go up to Evanston and take a photo of myself in front of Dale's door. What today we'd call a selfie. As a reminder of the joy, anticipation, and the butterflies that I felt every Friday at 1:45 p.m., just before having the privilege to talk economics with him.
Thanks, Guido. And thanks to all of you for coming, and especially to Beverly Mortensen to have come. We are honored to have you. But we are economists. So at the end of the story, we will reveal preference. And yesterday we had the meeting of the board, and we decided that from now on, one of our invited lectures will be a Dale Mortensen Memorial Lecture. Thanks to all of you, and thanks to the organizers, but do you want to say something?
I just wanted one quick minute to thank a couple people in the spirit of, this thing continuing to happen, who were essential to making this thing happen and may not be around later, because usually the dinner is when we do some of the thanking and stuff like that. First of all, you've seen the red-shirted people who are graduate students in economics, so people you'll keep seeing. Thank you for all their long hours. We had a student at the contraction show until 1, and they